He signed the divorce papers at 9:14 in the morning. Not with hesitation, not with trembling hands or a long pause at the signature line. Vincent Ashcroft pressed the pen down and signed his name the same way he signed every document that passed through his office. Clean, deliberate, final. The attorney across the table cleared his throat and said something about processing times. Vincent didn't hear it. He was already thinking about the afternoon briefing, the shipment coming through Providence, the lieutenant who'd been skimming from the Portsmouth account. He walked out of the courthouse into freezing March air and felt nothing. That was the part that would haunt him later. Not the signing, the nothing. If you have ever stood at a crossroads and chosen the wrong direction, not because you were cruel, but because you were simply too buried inside yourself to see clearly, then you already understand something about Vincent Ashcroft. And if you've ever watched someone you love disappear slowly, not in one dramatic moment, but across 1,000 quiet evenings where no one said the words that needed to be said, then you understand something about Charlotte. This is the story of what happens when a man who controlled everything finally lost the one thing he never knew he was still holding. Hit that like button if this story pulls at something in you. Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe and stay until the end, because what comes next will shake you. The courthouse was on Tremont Street, a granite building that smelled like floor wax and institutional coffee. Vincent's security team had swept it 40 minutes before his arrival. 2 men waited outside the main entrance. 2 more were positioned inside the lobby. His driver, a former Marine named Kessler, who never asked unnecessary questions, kept the engine running on the side street. Vincent wore a charcoal suit. No tie. He had stopped wearing ties to anything that wasn't a funeral or a federal negotiation. The attorney, a man named Drucker, who handled the legal periphery of Vincent's legitimate business holdings, slid the manila folder across the conference table without making eye contact. Drucker had learned early in their professional relationship that Vincent Ashcroft did not respond well to eye contact from people he was paying. "Everything's in order," Drucker said. Her attorney confirmed the filing will be uncontested. Given the asset structure, it should move quickly. Vincent opened the folder. Charlotte's name was at the top of the first page. Charlotte Marie Bennett Ashcroft. Her handwriting was in the margin beside the third clause. A small notation, a question she'd apparently asked her own attorney. Vincent stared at it longer than he intended. Her handwriting had always been precise. She wrote the way she did everything, carefully, deliberately, as though whatever she was doing deserved her full attention. He thought briefly about the fact that she had not contested a single clause, not the asset division, not the property arrangement, nothing. He told himself that meant she was ready, that this was what they both needed, that 2 people who had spent the last year existing in the same house like strangers sharing a train compartment had already said everything that could be said. He signed on the line marked with a small yellow arrow. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out. Kessler pulled the car around without being called. That was the thing about a man like Vincent. The world arranged itself around him so efficiently that he rarely had to ask for anything. It had been that way for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to need something and not receive it. In the back seat, his phone showed 14 unread messages. He scrolled through 3 of them and then stopped scrolling. Outside the tinted windows, Boston moved past him in the gray morning. Delivery trucks. A woman pushing a stroller against the wind. 2 teenagers arguing outside a coffee shop, their breath visible in the cold air. Vincent looked at none of it. He was already somewhere else in his mind. The Portsmouth account, the Providence shipment, the lieutenant whose name he had written on a short list inside a notebook that only he ever touched. He did not think about Charlotte. He told himself that was healthy. But Charlotte had left the house on Commonwealth Avenue at 7:45 that morning. She had a shift at the hospital, Mercy General, Labor and Delivery, where she had worked for 11 years. She knew every nurse on the floor by name, knew which doctors ran hot under pressure and which ones went cold and unreachable, knew which fathers were going to cry in the hallway and which ones were going to lock themselves in the restroom and cry there instead, thinking no one would hear them. She was good at her job, not in the way that shows up in performance reviews, but in the way that matters, the way that makes patients reach for her hand without thinking, the way that makes an exhausted mother at 4 in the morning trust her completely without knowing exactly why. She had worn her blue coat, the one with the collar that she always turned up against wind. She had not eaten breakfast because she had not been sleeping well and her appetite had been uncertain for weeks, which she had attributed to stress, and told herself she would deal with it when things settled, when the legal process was finished, when she could breathe again. She did not know about the divorce papers yet. Her attorney had called at 9:08 and left a voicemail, but Charlotte's phone was in her bag in the back seat, and she was looking out the window at the highway, watching the other cars. The SUV she was riding in was a hospital-contracted car service. She used it twice a week because Vincent's security team had, at some point 3 years ago, stopped offering to arrange her transportation, and she had stopped asking them to. That had been one of the quiet erosions, the kind you don't notice until you're standing in the rubble trying to find the original crack. She was thinking about a patient, a woman named Dolores, 34 weeks, who had come in 2 days earlier with elevated blood pressure and an expression Charlotte recognized, the expression of a woman who was frightened but refusing to perform her fear because she believed that would make things worse. Charlotte had sat with her for 20 minutes after her shift ended, just sat. They hadn't talked much. Charlotte was thinking about whether Dolores had slept. And then the world became noise. Shot. It happened at the Route 128 interchange, northbound. A flatbed truck carrying construction equipment had a brake failure at highway speed. The driver tried to pull right. He didn't have enough distance. The flatbed swung across 2 lanes, and the vehicles behind it had no time. It was that fast, that sudden, that total. The kind of accident that investigators later call a cascade event, where one mechanical failure becomes a dozen collisions in under 4 seconds. Charlotte's SUV was in the second wave. The impact came from the left rear quarter and spun the vehicle. The driver deployed the brakes and they held, but the second impact came before the car stopped moving, a sedan catching the front end and pushing the whole mass sideways into the guardrail. Charlotte was wearing her seatbelt. Her head hit the door window, her left arm went into the door panel, and then it was quiet. The kind of quiet that follows catastrophic noise. Not peaceful, but empty. A hole in the world where sound used to be. Vincent's phone rang at 9:52. It was Carver, the head of his personal security detail. Carver had been with him for 9 years and had a voice like gravel being poured into a metal bucket. He never called unless something required immediate action. "There's been an accident on 128, Carver said. Northbound. Charlotte was in the vehicle." Vincent did not speak. "She's been taken to Mercy General. That's all we have right now." The silence in the back of the car lasted approximately 3 seconds. Kessler, without being told, was already navigating toward the highway. "How bad?" Vincent said. It wasn't a question. It was the only 2 words he had available. "We don't know yet." Vincent put the phone down on the seat beside him and stared straight ahead. He had been in situations before where his body moved before his mind caught up, where instinct bypassed thought entirely and he simply acted, gave orders, redirected forces, controlled outcomes. That was the architecture of his life. That was what he was. A man who controlled outcomes. He could feel, in some specific and unfamiliar way, that this was different. This was not a problem he could redirect. He called Carver back. "I want 4 men at the hospital before we arrive. I want to know her doctor's name before I walk through the door. I want someone on the accident scene to get me information." "Already moving," Carver said. Vincent hung up. His hands were on his thighs. He noticed that his right hand was pressed flat against his leg, fingers spread, in the way that he sometimes positioned it when he was in a meeting where he needed to appear calm and wasn't. He pressed harder. Outside, the city blurred past. Mercy General's emergency entrance was controlled chaos when Vincent arrived. 2 of his men were already positioned near the entrance, visible enough that hospital security noticed but not aggressive enough to cause a scene. Carver met him at the door. "She's in trauma bay too," Carver said, walking with him. "Head laceration, possible concussion, left arm fracture. They're assessing for internal injuries." "Conscious?" "Intermittently." She was responsive at the scene. Vincent walked through the emergency department like he walked through every space, with the kind of presence that made people move without being told to. Nurses glanced up. An orderly with a cart shifted sideways. The attending physician at the nurse's station looked up and then looked at the man in the expensive charcoal suit with 4 men behind him and made a fast calculation. His name was Dr. Ellison. He was 40, competent in the way that comes from having seen too many bad things rather than from having been told he was good. He met Vincent before Vincent reached the door. "Mr. Ashcroft." "How is she?" "She's stable. The laceration is superficial. We're concerned about the arm. She may need surgical intervention depending on the fracture pattern. We're waiting on imaging." He paused. "There's something else." Vincent looked at him. "We ran a standard panel when she came in." Ellison held his ground, which Vincent registered. Most people stepped back when he looked at them that way. "Mr. Ashcroft, your wife is pregnant. Approximately 11 weeks. The hallway did not change. The noise of the emergency department did not change. Nothing in the external world shifted even slightly. But something happened inside Vincent Ashcroft's chest that he did not have a name for. A sensation like a structure giving way, like a load-bearing wall discovering it had been built on the wrong foundation. He said nothing. Ellison continued speaking. Vincent heard the words. Early pregnancy, stable, fetal monitoring, appears unaffected. Heard them in the way that a man hears things when his mind has already traveled somewhere else and left his body behind. 11 weeks. He counted backward without meaning to. 11 weeks was January, first week of January. He had been in New York for 5 days at the start of January, a series of meetings that had gone badly and then recovered. He remembered coming home late on a Thursday. Charlotte had been awake. They had talked. Briefly. More than they had in months, actually. He remembered thinking the next morning that maybe something had shifted. Then the meetings resumed and he left again. He had not thought about that night since January. He thought about it now with a precision that felt like a blade being drawn slowly across something soft. He was not permitted in the trauma bay immediately. He sat in a plastic chair in the waiting corridor outside. Vincent Ashcroft, the man who had never waited for anything in 20 years, sitting in a plastic chair in a hospital hallway while his security team stood at both ends of the corridor and 2 nurses walked past him without knowing who he was. His phone had not stopped buzzing. The afternoon briefing, the Portsmouth situation. 3 messages from his attorney Drucker, the last of which said simply, "Filing is processed. Anything you need?" Vincent turned his phone face down on his knee. He sat there for 41 minutes. He did not move. He did not call anyone. He did not conduct business or redirect his attention or think about the empire or the accounts or the men waiting for his instructions. He sat in a plastic chair in a hospital hallway and thought about a woman in a blue coat. He thought about the morning 8 years ago when he had first seen her at a charity event in Manhattan, the Aldrich Foundation Gala, 4th floor of a hotel he no longer remembered the name of. She had been arguing politely but firmly with a caterer about the temperature of something, and when she turned around and realized he was standing there and had heard the whole thing, she had not been embarrassed. She had tilted her head very slightly and said, "I'm right about the temperature, just so you know." He had laughed. Actually laughed, not the performance of amusement that he offered in professional settings, but the involuntary kind, the kind that comes up from somewhere real. He had thought about that laugh several times over the years, usually late at night when he was alone in his office and the building was quiet. He thought about it in the way you think about a version of yourself that existed before you made a series of choices you cannot take back. A nurse appeared at the corridor door. "Mr. Ashcroft? She's asking for you." He stood. His legs felt wrong, not weak exactly, but disconnected, as though the signals from his brain were arriving a half-second late. He walked to the door and pushed through it. Charlotte was in the bay with a bandage along her hairline and her left arm immobilized in a temporary splint. The overhead light was harsh. She looked smaller than she did at home, but that was the effect of hospital settings. They had a way of reducing people to their biological essentials. Her eyes were open. She looked at him when he came through the curtain, and her expression did something complicated that he couldn't name. "Hey," she said. Her voice was abraded at the edges, not from injury, from the particular texture of a person who has been crying and stopped. "Hey," he said. He sat in the chair beside the bed because his legs instructed him to. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The monitoring equipment produced its steady rhythm. Somewhere on the other side of the bay curtain, someone was speaking in a low, clinical tone. "They told you," she said. "Yes." Charlotte looked at the ceiling. Her jaw moved once before she spoke. "I found out 3 days ago. I was going to—" She stopped. Started again. "I didn't know how to say it. Given everything." "Given everything," he repeated. The words landed between them with a specific weight. Given everything was doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence. It was carrying 8 years. It was carrying the silence of 1,000 evenings. It was carrying a yellow arrow on a signature line and a handwriting note in a margin that he was never meant to see. "Charlotte." She looked at him. "I withdrew the filing," he said. Her face did not change immediately. Then something moved behind her eyes. Not relief, not anger, but something more complicated. Something that looked like a person who has been bracing for impact and cannot quite believe the collision hasn't arrived. "Vincent, I'm not asking for anything right now," he said. "I'm not asking you to say something or decide something. I withdrew the filing, that's all." She was quiet for a long time. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. "You can't just—" she started, then stopped, then said, more quietly, "You can't undo things just because something scared you. I know that." "Do you?" He looked at his hands. They were resting on his knees, and he noticed that he had stopped pressing them flat. The deliberate performance of calm he had been doing in the car and the hallway had fallen away without him noticing, and now they were just his hands, resting on his knees, looking like a man's hands. "No," he said. "Probably not entirely, but I know what I signed this morning was wrong, not just procedurally. Wrong." Charlotte turned her head away from him, toward the curtain. He could see her throat move. "I moved into the guest room," she said, "because I needed you to notice, not to punish you, not because I was done, because I needed you to look up from everything else long enough to see that I was still there." She paused. "You didn't." "I know." "You filed for divorce." "I know." "You signed the papers, Vincent. On the same morning that I was—" Her voice fractured. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. He had no defense. He did not offer one. The thing about a man who has spent decades winning arguments is that he understands, at a cellular level, when he has no argument left to make. This was that moment. He recognized it the way you recognize something you have been avoiding, not with surprise, but with the exhausted acknowledgement of inevitability. "I'm going to be here," he said, "for the appointment, for whatever comes next. I'm going to show you, not tell you." Charlotte looked back at him. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "You get one chance," she said, "not because I'm generous, because I'm too tired to decide anything today, and because—" Her hand moved almost involuntarily to her abdomen. "Because of that." Vincent looked at her hand. Something in his chest moved in a way that frightened him with its rawness. "Okay," he said, "just that. No promises, no declarations, no grand vocabulary." Outside, Boston was cold and moving and entirely indifferent. Inside, in a curtained bay in a trauma unit, two people who had nearly become strangers sat in the particular silence of something that had not yet decided what it was going to be. The monitor beeped. Neither of them spoke. And that, for now, was enough. They kept Charlotte overnight for observation. Vincent did not leave. He did not announce this decision or explain it to anyone. He simply did not leave. Carver brought him a change of clothes at 7 in the evening, a dark sweater, different trousers, and Vincent changed in the single-occupancy restroom down the hall from Charlotte's room, which they had moved her to once the trauma bay cleared. He folded his charcoal suit jacket over the back of the chair beside her bed and sat back down. And that was that. Charlotte slept in intervals. The arm was confirmed fractured. A clean break at the ulna that the orthopedic surgeon said would heal well with immobilization in time, no surgery required. The head laceration had been closed with 4 stitches. The concussion was mild. The baby, their son, though neither of them knew that yet, was unaffected. The OB on call, a small, precise woman named Doctor Vance, had come in at 6 and reviewed the fetal monitoring strip with an expression of professional satisfaction and said, Everything looks exactly as it should. Vincent had looked at that monitoring strip for a long time after Dr. Vance left. He did not sleep. Around 2 in the morning, Charlotte woke and found him still in the chair. She looked at him with the particular expression of a person who is not sure whether they are still dreaming. "You're still here," she said. "Yes." She was quiet. Then, "You don't have to." "I know." She looked at the ceiling. The room was dim, just the nightlight above the sink casting a low amber glow. Outside the door, the ward was in its overnight rhythm. Soft footsteps, the distant sound of a cart, someone's low voice at the nurse's station. "My attorney called," Charlotte said, 3 times. "I know, mine did too." "What did you tell him?" "That the filing was withdrawn." Vincent shifted in the chair. His back ached from the hours of sitting upright, but he did not adjust his posture in a way that would draw attention to it. "He'll need it in writing tomorrow. I'll handle it." Charlotte turned her head toward him. In the low light, her face was difficult to read. The bandage at her hairline caught the amber glow. Her eyes were in shadow. "Vincent, you can't withdraw a divorce filing because your wife got into an accident." "I didn't." "Then why?" He thought about the honest answer. The honest answer was layered and uncomfortable, and he was not accustomed to speaking it aloud, because speaking it aloud required him to acknowledge the specific failure at its center. He was a man who had built an entire life around never appearing to fail. "Because I signed those papers without actually deciding anything," he said. "I signed them because the silence in that house had gone on so long that I convinced myself silence was the same as consensus, that we had both already agreed to something neither of us had actually said." Charlotte did not respond immediately. "And the accident changed that calculation," she said. Not a question, testing it. "The accident reminded me that I had a calculation at all." He looked at his hands. "That I'd turned my marriage into a calculation. That's different." She was quiet for so long that he thought she might have fallen back asleep. Then she said, "I need you to understand something." "Okay." "Me agreeing to give you time. That's not me saying we're fine. That's not me saying this is fixed. That's me saying I'm too exhausted and in too much pain and too—" She exhaled. "Too much of everything right now to make a permanent decision about a temporary situation." "I understand that." "Do you understand that I have been invisible to you for 3 years?" The word invisible landed with a specific weight that Vincent felt in his sternum. "Yes," he said. "Say it back," she said. "Don't just agree. Say what you understand." He looked at her. "You were in that house every day," he said slowly, "and I treated your presence like ambient noise, something that was just there. I stopped seeing you as a person who needed things and started treating you like a piece of the structure, like the walls." Charlotte's jaw tightened, her eyes were wet, but her voice, when it came, was absolutely level. "I used to wait up for you," she said. "Not in a romantic way, just I'd sit in the kitchen, leave the light on over the stove, and you'd come in and you'd walk past, and sometimes you'd say goodnight, and sometimes you wouldn't, and either way you were already somewhere else before you cleared the door." He had no memory of this. That was the worst part. Not that he had done it, but that he had done it so consistently that it hadn't registered as a thing he was doing. "Charlotte, I'm not finished." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I'm telling you this because if you're going to be here, if this is real, and not just fear-talking, then you need to know exactly what you're apologizing for, not the general shape of it, the specific thing. Okay? You made me feel like loving you was something I was doing alone." The room was very still. "Yes," he said. "I did that." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back toward the ceiling and closed her eyes. "Go to sleep, Vincent," she said. "There's a cot in the family room at the end of the hall. Ask the nurse." He did not go to the cot. He stayed in the chair. But he did not say that because this particular moment was not about what he wanted. He left the hospital at 7 the next morning, once Charlotte's sister had arrived. Her name was Renata Bennett, and she came through the door with a duffel bag on one shoulder and an expression on her face that could have stripped paint. She was 2 years younger than Charlotte, and she had never, not once, not in 8 years, made any effort to conceal her opinion of Vincent Ashcroft. She stopped when she saw him. "You've got some nerve," she said. "Renata," Charlotte's voice from the bed, "please." Renata set the duffel down. She looked at her sister, the bandage, the splint, the hospital pallor, and her face went through something painful before it hardened again. Then she looked at Vincent. "She was in an accident," Renata said, "on the same day you filed for divorce." "I'm aware." "And you're still here." "I'm aware of that too." Her eyes narrowed. She had Charlotte's bone structure but a completely different energy. Where Charlotte was precise and contained, Renata was immediate, all her reactions arriving at the surface without editorial. Is that supposed to mean something? Because a man who actually gives a damn doesn't wait for a catastrophe to remember his wife exists. "Renata." Charlotte's voice was sharper now. "No, let her speak," Vincent said. He looked directly at Renata. "You're right. I waited too long. What you're saying is accurate, and I'm not here to argue it." Renata stared at him. Whatever she had been prepared to say next seemed to malfunction inside her chest. She pointed at him. "This is a tactic," she said to Charlotte. "This is what he does. He gets very calm and agreeable, and suddenly he's reasonable, and—" "Renata, I need you to take me to the bathroom," Charlotte said flatly. "And then I need you to go get me something that isn't hospital food. Can you do that?" Renata picked up the duffel. She threw Vincent one last look, the kind that contained an entire indictment inside it, and walked to her sister's bedside. Vincent took his jacket from the chair. He looked at Charlotte. She met his eyes briefly, and there was something in her expression, not warmth, not absolution, but an acknowledgement, a signal that the night had been real, that the conversation had been real, that she had heard him. He left. The world outside this hospital was indifferent and moving and demanded his immediate attention. By 8:15, he was in a car heading toward the South End, on the phone with Carver, hearing about the previous day's missed briefings with the controlled delivery of a man who has been professionally trained not to editorialize. "The Portsmouth situation moved," Carver said. "Donnelly's people pushed the meeting to Friday." "Fine." Rourke called 3 times. "I'll call him back." "And there's a situation with the Bellamy delivery. Discrepancy in the count, about 40 crates short of what was logged." Vincent was looking out the window at a woman walking a dog in the morning cold. The dog kept stopping to investigate things, and the woman kept stopping to wait for it, and she did not look impatient, just resigned, the way you get with things you love and can't hurry. "Who logged the count?" he said. "Milner." "And who cross-logged?" "Russo." "Get Milner and Russo in a room together before noon," Vincent said. "Don't tell either of them the other will be there. I'll know which one is lying from the first 3 sentences." "Got it." A pause. "How's Charlotte?" Carver never asked personal questions. The fact that he asked now indicated something, either that the accident had been significant enough to register even inside the sealed world of Vincent's organization, or that Carver himself had crossed a line of concern he'd normally keep behind professional distance. "She's stable," Vincent said. "The baby is fine." There was a brief pause. "I didn't know about that." "Neither did I." Another pause. "Okay," Carver said simply, and moved on. That was the thing about men like Carver. They absorbed information efficiently and did not perform their reactions. Vincent had always respected that. It occurred to him now, sitting in the back of the car with a bruised marriage and 11 weeks of unknowing behind him, that he had organized his entire life around men like Carver. People who did not demand that he feel things in visible ways, and that this had not served him. He called Rourke up. Daniel Rourke was 63, heavy-set, and had operated the southern Massachusetts territory for 20 years under an arrangement with the Ashcroft organization that had been profitable for both sides and periodically tense. He had the voice of a man who had once been a labor negotiator and had transferred those skills to a more specific application. "Vincent," he said when the call connected, "long day yesterday." "What do you need, Daniel?" A small pause, the kind that preceded a request that the person making it knows will be poorly received. "There's a problem with the Bellamy arrangement. Word is the count came up short, and I'm hearing Russo's name attached to it. Where'd you hear Russo's name? People talk. People in my organization don't talk to people in your territory, Vincent said. So let's start there. The pause was longer this time. I've got an interest in the Bellamy line. If there's a discrepancy in something that touches my operation, I handle it, Vincent said. That's the arrangement. Has been for 20 years. Nothing about that has changed. I heard you had a personal situation yesterday. Vincent's grip on the phone did not tighten, but something behind his eyes went very flat. Daniel, say what you're actually saying. I'm saying leadership needs to be present, especially when there are discrepancies. I was present, Vincent said. I am present, and I'm going to be very direct with you. If someone in your territory is feeding you real-time information about irregularities inside my operation before I've resolved them internally, that's a problem I'm going to locate and remove. Are we clear? A beat. Crystal, Rourke said. Good. I'll be in touch after Friday. He ended the call and held the phone in his hand for a moment. The conversation with Rourke had been routine in its texture, but not in its substance. Someone in his organization was talking outside it. That was a fracture. Small, perhaps, but fractures had a way of traveling. He made a note. He would deal with it. This was the machinery of his life reasserting itself. The problems, the channels, the calculations. And for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, sitting in the back of that car with his phone in his hand and the city moving past, he noticed the machinery from the outside, noticed how much of him it consumed, how little of him it left. He thought about Charlotte saying, "You made me feel like loving you was something I was doing alone." He stared at his phone. Then he opened his contacts and scrolled to a number he had never called. A name he had written down 6 months ago after a conversation he'd had with his physician, who had suggested it with the careful neutrality of a man recommending something to a patient he doesn't think will actually follow through. Dr. Alan Merritt, psychologist. He looked at the number for the length of 3 city blocks. Then he put the phone in his jacket pocket without calling. Charlotte was discharged on the second day. Renata drove her home, to the house on Commonwealth, because Charlotte's apartment lease had run out in November, and she had never actually moved her things out of the Commonwealth house, which was one of the small embarrassments of their separation that neither of them had addressed. She was technically living in a house she was in the process of leaving with a man she was in the process of leaving, and all of it had existed in this unresolved middle space that now felt, in retrospect, like a structure built deliberately to delay the moment of actual decision. Vincent was not at the house when they arrived. He had sent a message that morning. Meetings until 4. Staff has arranged everything for your return. Call me if you need anything. Renata read the message over Charlotte's shoulder while Charlotte sat on the edge of the bed with her splinted arm across her lap. Staff has arranged everything, Renata repeated. That's what he said. Don't. I'm not doing anything. I'm just reading. You're reading it in a voice. Renata put down the phone. She sat on the bed beside her sister. For a moment she said nothing. The particular silence of a person who has strong opinions and is actively restraining them out of love. How are you feeling? She said finally. Physically. Like I was in a car accident. How are you feeling about all of it? Charlotte looked at her left arm. The splint ran from her wrist to below her elbow. She'd been given a detailed set of care instructions she had already memorized because she was a nurse, and this was how her mind processed things. By absorbing information until the information filled enough space to crowd out the feeling. I don't know yet, Charlotte said. That's fair. I keep trying to decide what to believe. She was quiet. He was there all night, in the chair. He didn't leave. He also filed for divorce on the day you got hurt. I know that. I'm not trying to... I know you're not. Charlotte looked at her. Renata, I need you to not have an opinion about this right now. I need you to just be my sister and not have an opinion. Renata's face moved. Okay, she said, in a voice that indicated this was costing her something. Okay, I can do that. Thank you. They sat on the bed together. Outside the windows, the March afternoon was pale and cold, and the street was quiet. Charlotte felt the weight of the house around her, familiar and strange in the same breath, the way a place feels when you've spent time trying to leave it and then find yourself back inside it. "I have a prenatal appointment Thursday," Charlotte said. "Standard first trimester. He said he wants to come." Renata did not say anything. "I said okay," Charlotte said. "I don't know if that was right." "You don't have to know right now." Charlotte nodded slowly. Her free hand rested on her abdomen, not deliberately, not dramatically, just where it went. Vincent arrived at the house at 4:17. He came in through the side entrance from the garage the way he always did, moving quietly out of habit, even though there was no operational reason for it in his own home. He set his keys on the counter. The house was quiet. He could hear Renata's voice from upstairs, a low, indistinct murmur. He went to the kitchen. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. The staff had stocked it for Charlotte's return. Soft foods, approved items that would work around nausea. Specific teas that someone had apparently researched, though he doubted it was anyone on his security team who'd gone looking for ginger tea and prenatal vitamins. He looked at the prenatal vitamins on the counter. A small bottle. Orange label. For a healthy pregnancy. He picked it up, turned it in his hands, put it back down. Renata appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at him with the measured hostility of a person who had promised to be civil and was working hard at it. "She's resting," Renata said. "Okay." "She needs to rest, not talk, not process anything, just rest." "I understand." Renata crossed her arms. She had Charlotte's eyes, the shape, the color, but none of her patience. "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to either way," he said. That nearly cracked her composure. Something flickered at the corner of her mouth. "What changed?" she said. "Not the accident, not her being pregnant. What actually changed about you, Vincent, between when you signed those papers and now?" He looked at her directly. "Nothing," he said. "Yet." She waited. "That's the honest answer," he said. "I can't tell you I had some transformation in a hospital hallway. I can tell you I understood something I had been choosing not to understand. That's not the same as change. Change takes longer. I know that." Renata studied him. Her expression was complicated, still guarded, but something in it had shifted slightly, the way a person shifts when they hear something that wasn't what they were braced for. "She's going to test you," Renata said quietly. "Not on purpose. But every time you're late, every time work calls and you take it, every time she needs something small and you're not there for it, she's going to feel the whole 8 years of it, every single time. I know. You're going to fail at it sometimes. Probably. She won't give you unlimited chances." "She told me one," he said. "I took it." Renata looked at him for a long moment. Then she unfolded her arms. "I'm staying tonight," she said. "In the guest room." "It's your sister's house," Vincent said. "You don't need my permission." Renata looked at him once more with an expression he couldn't entirely decode, and then turned and went back toward the stairs. He stood in the kitchen alone. The prenatal vitamins were on the counter. The ginger tea was lined up beside them. The refrigerator hummed. He thought about calling Dr. Merritt. He thought about it with more weight than he had in the car, with the specific seriousness of a man who is beginning to understand that the problem is not external. He took out his phone. He dialed. It rang twice. An answering service, professional, brief. He left his name and number and the words "I'd like to schedule an appointment," and then he ended the call and put the phone on the counter and looked at it like it was an object he didn't recognize. He had built an empire on certainty, on knowing what he was doing and why, on the particular confidence that came from never needing to ask anyone how to handle what was in front of him. He had just asked for help. It did not feel like weakness, exactly. It felt like walking through a door he hadn't realized was there. He was still looking at the phone when it buzzed. A message from Carver. "Russo and Milner meeting done. You need to call me. Tonight." He picked up the phone. And then, from upstairs, quiet but audibly, Charlotte's voice, calling his name. Not sharply, not with urgency. Just his name. The way you say someone's name when you know they're nearby and you need them to come. He looked at Carver's message. He looked at the ceiling toward where her voice had come from. He put the phone back down on the counter, message unanswered, and went upstairs. She was sitting up in the bed with the lamp on beside her. She had a glass of water and the prenatal vitamin instructions in her hand, and she looked for a moment very young and very tired and completely without pretense. "I can't open the bottle," she said. She held up her splinted arm. "The child-proof cap." He crossed the room, sat on the edge of the bed, took the vitamin bottle, pressed and turned the cap, and handed it back to her. She shook one out, looked at it, swallowed it with water. "Thank you," she said. "Yeah," he said. They sat there for a moment in the lamplight. The house was quiet around them. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car moved slowly down the wet street. Charlotte set the water down. She did not look at him. "Thursday," she said. 11 o'clock. Dr. Vance's office. "I'll be there. If something comes up." "I'll be there," he said again. No qualifications. She nodded slowly. Her free hand moved to her abdomen again, that same absent gesture. He watched it happen. He didn't say anything about it. "I'm scared," she said. Quiet, factual, with no performance in it, the way you say a true thing when you are too tired to dress it up. "Me too," he said. She looked at him then. Really looked, the way she used to in the early years when she was trying to figure him out. Something crossed her face that he couldn't name, something that lived between trust and its opposite. "Don't lie to me," she said. "Whatever happens, even if the truth is bad, don't lie to me." "I won't." "Promise me that specifically, not that you'll be better, not that things will change. Promise me that specific thing." He held her gaze. "I promise you that specific thing." She nodded, once. Then she reached over and turned off the lamp. In the dark, Vincent sat on the edge of the bed and listened to her breathing slow as she drifted toward sleep. His phone was downstairs on the kitchen counter with Carver's message unanswered. He knew what Carver's message meant. He had worked with Carver long enough to parse the temperature of his communications. "You need to call me tonight with nothing else attached" meant that the discrepancy in the Bellamy count had resolved into something more than a discrepancy. It meant that the fracture he had identified in Rourke's call that morning had already opened wider than he'd calculated. He sat in the dark. He stayed. The problem would be there in the morning. Problems like that always were. They accumulated and waited, and they did not resolve themselves in the dark hours while a man sat on the edge of a bed listening to his wife breathe. But for the first time in longer than he could accurately measure, Vincent Ashcroft was exactly where he was supposed to be. He told himself that was a beginning. He did not let himself believe it was enough. He called Carver at 6 in the morning. Charlotte was still asleep. The room was dark except for the gray light beginning at the edges of the curtains. Vincent had not slept. He had sat in the chair beside the window for most of the night, listening to the house settle and the street outside move through its quiet hours. And somewhere around 4, he had stopped pretending he was going to sleep and simply accepted the wakefulness and let his mind work. He went downstairs, made coffee, stood at the kitchen counter in the early gray light, and called Carver. Carver picked up on the first ring, which meant he also hadn't slept. "Talk to me," Vincent said. "Russo didn't skim the count," Carver said. He falsified it. There's a difference. The 40 crates weren't lost in transit. They were redirected. We traced the delivery route and found a secondary drop point in Quincy. Warehouse on Hancock Street. Not one of ours. Vincent set down his coffee cup. "Whose?" "That's the part you're not going to like." A pause. The briefest possible pause. The kind Carver used when he was delivering information he'd verified 3 times because he needed to be certain before he said it. The warehouse traces to a shell company, 3 layers of incorporation, but the operating address on the original LLC filing is registered to a property management firm that handles 2 commercial buildings, one in Cambridge, one in the South End. Both buildings are managed on behalf of a holding entity that Daniel Rourke controls through his son-in-law. The kitchen was very quiet. "Russo is feeding Rourke," Vincent said. "Has been for a minimum of 8 months, maybe longer. The 40 crates were not the first. We think they were just the first time the count discrepancy was large enough to flag internally. Vincent stood at the counter and felt something cold and specific move through him. Not anger yet, but its precursor. The recognition of the shape of a thing before the feeling arrives to fill it. "How deep does Russo go?" he said. "We don't know yet. That's the problem. He has access to the logistics side, delivery routes, timing, contact names. If he's been feeding that to Rourke for 8 months, then Rourke knows our movement patterns. Yes. And if Rourke knows our movement patterns, he knows our exposure points. Yes." Vincent was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, "Where is Russo now?" "His apartment. We have eyes on him. He doesn't know we know. Keep it that way. I want him watched, but not moved, not yet. I need to understand the full scope before we take any action." "Understood." Another pause. "There's one more thing." Vincent waited. "Rourke called Milner last night, after the meeting, Milner's phone. We had it flagged from the Bellamy situation. The call lasted 4 minutes. We don't have audio. It was a personal line, not one we monitor, but the timing is not coincidental." "Milner called you this morning?" Vincent said. "At 5:45. Claimed he had new information about the count discrepancy. Wanted to meet today." "He's panicking," Vincent said. "Rourke told him we were closing in, and now Milner is trying to calculate which side of this offers him better odds." "That's my read." Vincent looked at the coffee cup on the counter, steam still rising from it in the cold kitchen air. "Tell Milner yes, noon, the office on Tremont, and I want the room wired." "Already arranged," Carver said. "I had a feeling." "One more thing." Vincent's voice did not change in register or temperature, but something behind it sharpened. "Find out if Rourke has had any contact with the federal field office in Boston in the last 12 months. A longer pause this time. "You think he's flipped," Carver said. "I think a man who has operated quietly for 20 years suddenly starts feeding from my logistics chain 6 months after a federal indictment in Providence names 2 of his former associates. I don't think that's coincidence. I think that's a man building a case for someone who offered him a better arrangement than I can." Carver was quiet for a moment. "If Rourke is cooperating with federal investigators, then everything Russo gave him is potentially in a file somewhere," Vincent said. "And we have a problem that is significantly larger than 40 missing crates." He ended the call. He stood in the kitchen for a moment with his hand flat on the counter. Then he picked up his coffee, poured it into the sink, and made a fresh cup because the first one had gone cold while he was talking and he needed to do something with his hands that was not breaking anything. Ta-ta. He was dressed and in his office on the 2nd floor by 7, phone against his ear, working through the list of people who needed to be contacted and in what order. His attorney, not Drucker, who handled the legitimate holdings, but a different man, a criminal defense specialist named Hargrove, who had his personal number and answered calls at 7 in the morning without complaint. His financial director to begin identifying which accounts touched the Bellamy logistics chain. 2 of his senior lieutenants, not Russo, not Milner, but 2 men whose loyalty he had tested over a decade and whose judgment he trusted above almost everyone else. He was 40 minutes into this when he heard Charlotte in the hallway. She knocked on the office door. She had always knocked, even when they were at their best, because the office was a space she had learned early to treat as separate from the rest of the house. He registered the knock. He held up one finger, though she couldn't see it, and finished the sentence he was delivering to Hargrove. "Hold on," he told Hargrove. He covered the phone. "Come in." She opened the door. She was in a robe, her arm in the splint, her hair pulled back loosely. She had the look of a person who had slept but not deeply. The specific flatness around the eyes that comes from sleep that didn't quite reach the part of you that needed it. She looked at him, then at the phone, then at him again. "Sorry," he said. "Give me 10 minutes." "It's fine." Her voice was neutral. "I just wanted coffee. I didn't know you were up." 10 minutes, he said again. She nodded and closed the door. He went back to Hargrove. He finished the call in 8 minutes. Then he sat at the desk for a moment with his hands on the surface, looking at the closed door. He had said 10 minutes. He had 8 minutes of calls left to make. He put the phone in his drawer. He went downstairs. Charlotte was at the kitchen counter with her coffee, reading something on her phone with the careful, one-handed management of a person adapting to a temporary physical limitation. She looked up when he came in. He poured himself coffee. He did not take his phone out of his pocket. "How's the arm?" he said. "Manageable." She set her phone down. "You're in the middle of something?" "It can wait." She looked at him with the particular expression of a woman who has been married to a man for 8 years and has developed a precise instrument for detecting when he is telling her what she wants to hear. "Vincent." "It can wait until after breakfast," he said. "That's true." A beat. She seemed to measure this. "Okay," she said. He made eggs. He had not cooked in this kitchen in... He could not accurately count. Renata came downstairs at 7:40 and stopped in the kitchen doorway at the sight of Vincent Ashcroft at the stove with a spatula in his hand and produced an expression of such transparent bewilderment that Charlotte almost smiled. "There's coffee," Charlotte told her. Renata looked at Vincent, then at Charlotte. Then she got her coffee and sat at the island and said nothing, which was, Vincent understood, an enormous act of self-discipline on her part. They ate. The conversation was not profound. Charlotte asked about the prenatal vitamin instructions, whether the pharmacy could deliver, whether the OB had sent anything to her primary care physician. Practical things. The conversation of people managing logistics rather than feelings, which was fine, which was what this moment required. It was normal in the way that normal feels slightly unreal when you are not used to it. At 8:15, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He did not take it out. At 8:22, it buzzed again. Charlotte watched him not take it out. He watched her watch him. Neither of them said anything about it. At 8:30, he cleared the plates. She thanked him. He told her he had to make calls, and she said she knew. And the way she said it, not bitterly, not with accusation, but with simple acceptance, was somehow worse than if she had been angry. He went back upstairs. The Milner meeting happened at noon. Milner was 51, a logistics coordinator who had worked in Vincent's organization for 14 years. He was a careful man. Not brave, not particularly intelligent, but careful. The kind of careful that had kept him useful and invisible for a long time. He came into the Tremont office with the bearing of a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say and was already doubting the rehearsal. He sat across from Vincent. Carver stood near the door. "You said you had information," Vincent said. Milner looked at his hands on the table. He had large hands, thick-fingered, the hands of a man who had done physical work before he found work that didn't require it. "I want to be clear that I wasn't part of the original arrangement," he said. "What arrangement is that?" Vincent said. "Between Russo and..." He stopped, looked up. "You already know. I want to hear it from you." Milner exhaled, a long, deflating sound, like air leaving something that had been pressurized too long. "Russo has been routing product through a secondary channel since last August. 40 crates this week was the largest single pull. Before that, it was smaller amounts, incremental." "Who approached who?" "Rourke approached Russo. Through an intermediary, a man named Cates works the dock scheduling in Quincy. Russo came to me in September because he needed someone to adjust the manifest records, and I..." He stopped again. His jaw moved. "I should have come to you then." "You should have," Vincent said. "Why didn't you?" "Russo said it was sanctioned, at a level above logistics, that it was an arrangement you were aware of." "And you believe that?" The silence was its own answer. "Did Russo tell you anything else?" Vincent said. "About why Rourke wanted the product, where it was going after the secondary drop." Milner's eyes moved to Carver and back to Vincent. Something shifted in his expression. A calculation visible enough that Vincent could watch it happening. The man was deciding how much to trade. "Milner," Vincent said quietly, "whatever you're deciding right now, decide faster." "Russo mentioned federal," Milner said. "Once. In passing. He said Rourke had a situation that required him to demonstrate cooperation, that the product was going to be logged as evidence of a competing organization's operations." He met Vincent's eyes. "I didn't understand what that meant at the time." Vincent understood it now. Rourke wasn't just stealing from him. Rourke was building a frame, redirecting Ashcroft product through a paper trail designed to make it look like evidence of Ashcroft's operations being run independently of any oversight. The kind of documentation that a federal cooperating witness would present as proof that the organization was larger, more active, and more specifically criminal than any existing indictment covered. Rourke was not just cooperating with the federal investigation. He was manufacturing evidence. Vincent stood. He buttoned his jacket, which he always did when a meeting was finished, and he didn't trust himself to remain still. "You're going to write down everything you just told me," he said to Milner. "Dates, names, amounts, everything Russo told you, everything you adjusted, all of it. You're going to do that today, and you're going to give it to Carver." He paused. "And you're going to stay available." "And in exchange?" Milner said. Vincent looked at him without warmth. "In exchange for accuracy and speed, you get to keep everything you currently have." He did not define everything. He didn't need to. "If I find out you've left anything out, the calculation changes." Milner nodded. He was pale. Vincent walked out. In the hallway outside the Tremont office, he stood alone for approximately 45 seconds. The scope of it was becoming clear in the specific, terrible way that complex problems become clear. Not all at once, but in expanding rings, each new ring revealing how much larger the shape was than the previous ring had suggested. Rourke cooperating with federal investigators was manageable, in isolation. Men flipped. It happened. There were protocols. But Rourke manufacturing evidence, redirecting Ashcroft product through a chain designed to look like independent criminal enterprise, designed to implicate people, to give federal investigators documentation of activity they could present before a grand jury, that was a different problem entirely. That was not a man protecting himself. That was a man building a weapon, and if federal investigators had already received any portion of what Rourke was constructing, then the exposure was not theoretical. It was current. Vincent took out his phone and called Hargrove. "Tell me you have something on the federal side, but," he said when Hargrove answered. "I've made some calls." Hargrove's voice was measured. He was a man who delivered bad news with the same intonation as good news, which made him excellent in courtrooms and unnerving in private conversation. "There's activity in the Boston field office on a matter adjacent to Providence. I can't confirm scope, but the timing, a grand jury was convened quietly in January. The same month Rourke's people had apparently accelerated the Russo arrangement. Can you find out if my name or my organization is specifically referenced in any filing?" Vincent said. "Not quickly, and not without creating a footprint that could itself become a problem." "Understood." Vincent pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. A headache was developing behind his left eye. Not a sharp one, but the slow, pressurized kind that came from sustained tension and no sleep. "What's my exposure if a grand jury has documentation showing product with my chain of custody signatures arriving at an address that doesn't appear in any of my legitimate records?" "That depends entirely on how the documentation is framed," Hargrove said. "If it's presented as evidence of a parallel operation," he paused. "Vincent, this isn't a conversation for the phone." "Tonight," Vincent said. 7 o'clock. Bring everything you have." He ended the call. He stood in the hallway. Then his phone rang, and it was Charlotte's number, and the jolt of it, the sudden shift from one world to the other, from the cold machinery of his professional crisis to the entirely different and equally fragile situation he had left that morning, was physical, a kind of whiplash he felt in his chest. He answered. "Hey," he said. He made his voice normal. He was very good at making his voice normal. "Hey." Hers was not quite normal. There was something underneath it, a tightness, a restraint. "Are you still planning to be back for dinner?" "Yes, before 7. "Okay." A pause. "Renata is leaving this afternoon. She has to get back." "Okay." Another pause, longer, the kind with something in it. "Charlotte, what is it?" "My attorney called again," she said. "She needs to know what's happening, procedurally. Whether the withdrawal is formal or whether it's just..." She stopped. "She needs to know what to tell people. Tell her the withdrawal is formal. I'll have Drucker send the paperwork today." "Okay." The word came out smaller than she intended. He could hear her processing something on the other end of the line, working through a feeling without performing it, the way she always managed things. "I'll be home before 7, he said. "We can talk if you want to." "Okay," she said again. Then, "Vincent, are you—" She stopped. "Am I what?" "Are you okay? You sound—" She seemed to search for the word. "Far away." He looked down the hallway. Empty. Gray afternoon light through a window at the end. "Long morning," he said. "I'm fine. I'll see you before 7. He ended the call. He was not fine. He was standing in a hallway with a federal grand jury potentially examining manufactured evidence connecting his operation to activity it hadn't conducted, a lieutenant who had been feeding his logistics chain to a cooperating witness for 8 months, and a marriage in its most fragile state, held together right now by nothing more substantial than proximity and a promise he hadn't yet had the opportunity to prove. He walked back toward the office. He arrived home at 6:48. Renata's car was gone from the front. The house was quiet in the specific way it goes quiet when the number of people in it has reduced. A different quality of silence, thinner. Charlotte was in the living room. She was on the couch with her legs folded under her and a book open in her lap that she was not reading. She looked up when he came in, and he could see immediately that something had shifted in the hours since the phone call. "How are you feeling?" he said. "I got an email," she said. He stopped. "From the courthouse." Her voice was careful, the voice she used when she was managing something very precisely because the alternative was not managing it. "A procedural notification. Apparently, when a withdrawal is submitted after initial processing, both parties receive a status update." She looked at him. "The timestamp on the original filing, Vincent. It was 9:14 in the morning." He said nothing. "The accident happened at 9:52, she said. "You filed for divorce 38 minutes before I was in a car accident. Not on the same day in some general sense. 38 minutes. "Charlotte." "I knew that," she said. "I knew the timing. But seeing the timestamp in writing—" She stopped. Her hand was pressed flat on the open book in her lap. It made it very concrete. He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her. Not beside her. He understood instinctively that beside her was not the right distance for this conversation. "Tell me what you need to say," he said. "I need to know if you would have called me," she said. "If the accident hadn't happened. If you had signed those papers and I had been fine, would you have called me, or would you have just—" Her voice fractured slightly. She steadied it. "Would you have let it go quiet? The way everything else went quiet?" The question was specific and terrible and deserved an honest answer. He thought about the morning, about Kessler pulling the car around, about sitting in the back seat scrolling through messages and thinking about Portsmouth and Providence, and the lieutenant whose name was on a list. "I don't know," he said. Charlotte's jaw tightened. "That's not the answer you want," he said. "But it's the true one. I signed those papers, and I got in that car, and I was already somewhere else. Whether I would have come back around to actually feeling it, I don't know. I'd like to tell you I would have. I don't know if I would have." The silence was very heavy. "I need you to understand what that does to me," Charlotte said. Her voice was low and absolutely direct. "Hearing that, I need you to sit with that and not explain it away, and not give me reasons. I just need you to understand what it does to me." "I understand what it does to you," he said. "It tells you that for the 8 years you were trying to reach me, the reaching was necessary. That it wasn't you imagining the distance. It was real." Her eyes were wet, but nothing fell. She held it with the specific discipline of a woman who has had to learn to hold things inside spaces where falling apart was not possible. 11 years in a labor ward will teach you that, if nothing else. "Yes," she said. "I'm sorry," he said. Not as a sentence designed to end the conversation, as a statement delivered with full awareness of what it could not undo. She looked at him for a long time, then she said, "Dr. Vance's office called to confirm Thursday." "I'll be there." She nodded. She looked back down at the book in her lap. He understood this as a signal, not a cold one, but the signal of a person who has spent the available emotional currency for this particular hour and needs to stop. He went to the kitchen and made dinner because making dinner was something concrete that he could do with his hands. Hargrove arrived at 7 on the dot. Vincent had told Charlotte he had a work meeting at 7. Not a lie, technically, though the category of work it involved was one that didn't appear on any document she had access to. She had nodded and gone upstairs, which told him she was exhausted and trusting him provisionally, and he was aware of both of those things simultaneously while Hargrove spread documents across the desk in his office. A grand jury was formally convened in January, Hargrove said. He was a lean man in his late 50s with silver hair and reading glasses that he pushed to the top of his head when he was thinking. The Providence matter is the nominal subject, but the scope, based on what I can access through professional channels, appears to extend into Massachusetts operations. Rourke is the conduit, Vincent said. That's my assessment. He was named as a peripheral figure in the Providence indictment. That indictment was filed in October. By November, his attorneys were in quiet conversations with the U.S. Attorney's Office. By January, there's a grand jury. Hargrove looked at him over the reading glasses. The timeline is very tight and very deliberate. The manufactured evidence from the Bellamy chain, Vincent said. If it's been submitted to the grand jury, then it's in a sealed federal record and there's nothing we do from the outside to affect it, Hargrove said. What we can affect is the response. We document everything that demonstrates the chain was compromised. Russo's falsification, the secondary drop point, Rourke's shell company. We build a counter-narrative that shows the evidence was manufactured, not organic. How long does that take? Hargrove was quiet for a moment. Months, he said, in the best case. And in the worst case? In the worst case, the grand jury moves faster than we can construct the counter-narrative, and someone in this building receives a target letter before we're ready. The office was very quiet. Who's most exposed? Vincent said. Hargrove looked at the documents on the desk. Based on what you've described about Russo's access, the logistics chain, the contact names, the delivery documentation, the person most likely to appear in any federal filing as a named individual would be whoever signed the chain of custody documents that Russo was feeding into. That would be Carver. On the operational side, Hargrove said carefully, and on the organizational side, the person at the top of the chain that all of it connects back to. He did not finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Vincent stood. He walked to the window. The street outside was dark and wet, the streetlights making orange circles on the pavement below. He had faced serious problems before, the kind that required surgical decisions and the will to make them without hesitation. He had never faced a problem where the solution required him to dismantle something he had spent 20 years building, potentially expose men who had been loyal, and do all of it while standing in the most vulnerable position of his personal life. He turned from the window. I need Russo picked up, he said, quietly. Tonight. I need to know exactly what he gave Rourke and in what form. Dates, methods, everything. Hargrove did not react to this. He was not that kind of attorney. And Rourke? Hargrove said. Rourke I handle separately. Vincent's voice had gone to a place that had no temperature in it at all. The federal relationship he has built is the problem. The man himself is a symptom. Hargrove gathered the documents. He put his glasses back on his nose. Vincent, he said, if you take any action against Rourke that federal investigators can connect back to you during an active grand jury proceeding, I know what that would mean, Vincent said. I need to hear you say it. It would end everything, Vincent said. It would give them exactly what they need and remove any possibility of a defensible counter-narrative. He paused. I'm not going to do something stupid, Alan. I'm going to do something very careful and very slow, and it's going to feel insufficient for a long time before it becomes enough. Hargrove looked at him. Something moved behind the attorney's eyes. Not surprise exactly, but a form of reassessment. Okay, Hargrove said. Then let's start building it. He left at 9:15. Vincent sat at the desk after he was gone, in the quiet office, with the documents Hargrove had left for him to review. He could hear the house around him, the sounds of a structure settling in the cold, the distant sound of water running somewhere, Charlotte moving in the room above him. His phone showed 6 missed messages from the operational side. Carver had already located Russo. 2 of the messages contained logistics of a kind that required his immediate attention. He also saw, in the notification tray, a missed call from a number he didn't recognize that had come in at 7:41. When he looked up the number, it was Dr. Merritt's office, the psychologist. a callback from the message he'd left the previous night. He sat there. On one side of his attention, the operational emergency, the grand jury, Russo, Rourke, the entire architecture of his empire showing its stress fractures simultaneously, each crack accelerating the next. On the other side, a callback from a psychologist he had called in a dark kitchen the night before, in the first unguarded moment he'd had in years, because a woman upstairs had asked him to promise her a specific thing, and he had understood for the first time that he did not know how to keep it alone. He looked at the phone for a long moment. Then he did something that would have been unrecognizable to the version of himself who had walked out of the courthouse 38 minutes before his wife's world came apart. He called the psychologist's number back, got the answering service again, and left a second message confirming the appointment for whatever the earliest available slot was, his voice steady and entirely without. The appointment with Dr. Merritt was confirmed for the following Tuesday at 8 in the morning. Vincent wrote it in his phone calendar and then stared at the entry for a moment before closing the screen. He had never written a therapist appointment in his calendar. He had written the addresses of men who needed to disappear. He had written the coordinates of properties that needed to change hands. He had written, in the early years, the names of people he was afraid of, so that he could look at the list and remind himself that fear was information, not instruction. He had never written this. He closed his phone and went to bed at midnight and lay in the dark beside Charlotte, who had, without comment, stopped sleeping in the guest room sometime between his going upstairs and her following, and listened to her breathe and did not sleep until nearly 3. Tuesday arrived with a cold rain that had been falling since Sunday and showed no intention of stopping. Carver had Russo in a secure location in Somerville by Monday night. The conversation with Russo, which Carver handled personally in the specific way that Carver handled things that required absolute accuracy and no margin for misinterpretation, produced a complete accounting by 11 p.m. 8 months of redirected product, 14 separate pulls before the 40-crate event, a paper trail that Rourke's people had constructed with the assistance of a forensic accountant whose name Vincent did not recognize, which meant the man was either new to this kind of work or was very good at staying invisible. The federal connection was confirmed through a different channel, a contact inside the Boston field office, whose relationship with Vincent's organization was transactional and had been for 7 years. The contact could not confirm the specific contents of any grand jury filing, but confirmed that Rourke had been formally designated as a cooperating witness in October, and that his cooperation agreement required him to produce, in Hargrove's words, actionable documentation of ongoing criminal enterprise within the named organization's operational territory. Actionable documentation. They had been using Ashcroft's own product chain to build that documentation for 8 months. By Tuesday morning, Vincent had been awake for 36 of the previous 48 hours, had consumed more coffee than he could accurately count, and had the specific hollowed clarity of a man operating well past the edge of his physical tolerance. He sat across from Dr. Alan Merritt at 8 a.m. in a quiet office in Back Bay, neutral colors, 2 chairs, a small table with a glass of water on it, a window showing the wet gray street, and felt for the first moment in days that no one in this room was going to ask him to make a decision. Merritt was in his early 60s, gray hair, trimmed close. He had the quality of stillness that some people develop through discipline and others are simply born with. He let the silence sit without filling it, which was, Vincent realized within the first 30 seconds, a professional choice. "I don't know how to do this," Vincent said. "That's fine," Merritt said. "Most people don't the first time. I'm also managing a significant professional crisis. I want you to know that because it will probably affect how present I can be." "Noted," Merritt folded his hands. "Why did you call?" Vincent looked at the window, rain on the glass, moving in slow diagonals. "My wife asked me to promise her one specific thing, that I wouldn't lie to her. And I promised it. And I understood when I promised it that I don't know how to do that. Not because I'm dishonest. Because I've spent 20 years in a world where information is a resource and you don't give it away without calculation. And she is asking me to uncalculate myself. And I don't know how to do that." Merritt was quiet for a moment. "What does lying to her protect?" Vincent looked at him. Her. From what? From knowing things she can't unknow. Is that for her benefit or yours? The question arrived without inflection and landed with the force of something thrown at high velocity. Vincent felt it in his chest. The specific impact of a question that doesn't ask you to defend yourself but simply illuminates what you've been avoiding. He did not answer immediately. He sat with it. Mine, he said finally. Primarily. Merritt nodded. He did not look satisfied or unsatisfied. He simply received the answer as information. What would happen if she knew the things you're protecting her from? She might leave. And if she left? Then I would have lost the thing I am trying not to lose. So the protection is a way of managing risk. Yes. And what you're discovering, Merritt said, is that managing risk in your marriage the same way you manage it everywhere else is precisely what created the distance she's been trying to cross. Vincent looked at him. Yes, he said. That's exactly it. Merritt let that sit for a moment. Okay, he said. That's a good place to start. It was the most functional 45 minutes Vincent had spent in years, and he left the office in the rain feeling simultaneously more exposed and more oriented than he could remember feeling since he was a young man who had not yet built anything, and therefore had nothing to protect. He got in the car. He checked his phone. 11 messages from Carver. The last one, sent 4 minutes ago, said simply, Rourke called a meeting today. He's asking for you specifically. Neutral location, he says. 2 p.m. Vincent read it twice. Then he called Carver. He knows we're close, Carver said before Vincent could speak. This is a play. He wants to either negotiate or assess how much we have. Or both, Vincent said. You're not seriously considering going. I'm seriously considering everything right now. Vincent watched the rain on the car window. What location did he propose? The Harborview Club, 3rd floor private dining. He's been a member there for 15 years. It's clean, no operational exposure, completely public enough that nothing physical happens. He wants witnesses, Vincent said. He wants a conversation that exists. Which tells you he's not trying to end it here. He's trying to stabilize it. Buy time, maybe. Or feel out whether we have enough to move against him. Or he's already talked to his federal handler and this meeting is being monitored, Vincent said. Silence. If you walk into a room with a federal cooperating witness, Carver started, I know what it means. Don't go anywhere. I'll call you back in 10 minutes. He called Hargrove. Don't go, Hargrove said before Vincent finished explaining the situation. If I don't go, he knows we're in a defensive position. He'll accelerate whatever he's building. If you go and the room is wired, then I say nothing he can use. I go and I listen and I learn what he thinks he knows. Vincent. Hargrove's voice was as close to urgent as it got, which was not very close but was noticeable if you knew the man. A federal cooperating witness invites you to a private meeting during an active grand jury proceeding. There is no version of attending that meeting that doesn't create risk. There's also no version of not attending that doesn't signal weakness to a man who is already testing what I'll do. He paused. I'll have an attorney present. A very long pause. That would be me, Hargrove said. That would be you. The Harborview Club occupied the top 3 floors of a building on Atlantic Avenue that had been a shipping company's headquarters in the 1920s and had spent the intervening century becoming progressively more expensive. The 3rd floor private dining room looked over the harbor through windows that were still streaked with the morning's rain. Rourke was already there when Vincent and Hargrove arrived. He was seated at the far end of a table set for 4, with a man Vincent didn't know. Late 40s, square jaw, the particular kind of unremarkable clothing that occasionally indicated federal law enforcement and occasionally indicated nothing at all. Rourke stood when they entered. He had the practiced ease of a man who had spent decades in rooms like this, building the appearance of legitimacy one handshake at a time. Vincent, he said. Alan, he gestured toward the unknown man. This is my attorney, Paul Greer. Hargrove and Greer exchanged the specific look of 2 attorneys recognizing each other across a room and immediately beginning to calculate everything they knew about the other. They sat. No food was ordered, no pretense of a meal. Rourke looked at Vincent across the table with the expression of a man who has decided honesty is now more efficient than strategy. I think we both understand why we're here, he said. Tell me why you think we're here, Vincent said. The Bellamy situation has come to light. I'm aware your people have located the secondary facility. He placed his hands on the table, pulse, flat, open. A gesture of theater. I want to resolve this without it becoming something neither of us benefits from. What you did wasn't a Bellamy situation, Vincent said. What you did was redirect my product to manufacture evidence for a federal filing you've been building since October. Rourke's expression didn't crack, but something in it recalibrated. A micro-adjustment, the kind that happens when a man realizes his opponent has more information than he'd assumed. That's a significant accusation, Greer said from beside him. Your client can respond to it, Hargrove said, in the tone he used when he wanted someone to understand that he was not going to be managed. Rourke looked at Vincent. The situation I found myself in last fall was not one I engineered, he said. The Providence matter created a pressure that required me to make decisions I wouldn't have made otherwise. You used my operation to protect yourself, Vincent said. I used what was available to me. You built a frame, Vincent said. His voice had not risen. It was flat and even and had the quality of something that doesn't need volume to land. You redirected my product through a chain designed to look like independent criminal enterprise. You gave federal investigators documentation that positions my organization as something it isn't, in a configuration that exposes specific people to charges they didn't earn. Rourke looked at him. A long moment. What do you want? He said. I want the documentation recalled, Vincent said. Whatever you've submitted, whatever is in that federal file, I want it walked back. I can't recall what's already been submitted to a grand jury, Rourke said. You can tell your federal handler that the documentation was falsified, Vincent said. That you manufactured it. That it doesn't represent actual enterprise activity. Rourke's jaw tightened. If you do that, you destroy your own cooperation agreement, Hargrove said quietly. Your immunity arrangement becomes void. You become a subject of the investigation rather than a cooperating witness. That's what I'm offering you, Vincent said. The table was very still. You're asking me to take down my own immunity, Rourke said. I'm asking you to tell the truth about what you gave them. Vincent held his gaze. Which is the thing you built, and not something that actually happened. If the evidence is fabricated and you admit it, the grand jury's foundation collapses. My people are clear, and you take the consequences of what you did. And if I don't, Rourke said, then I release everything we have about the construction of the evidence chain, Rousseau's falsification, your shell company, Kate's on the Quincy dock, the forensic accountant whose name I now have, to Hargrove, who will file it with every relevant authority and use it to demolish whatever the federal case is building on your testimony. Which also destroys your immunity, Greer said to Rourke. Which also destroys his immunity, Hargrove confirmed, and makes him a documented evidence fabricator rather than a cooperating witness. The distinction matters considerably in terms of the sentencing guidelines he was presumably promised. Rourke sat back in his chair. He looked at the table. He had the expression of a man doing mathematics he doesn't like in real time, each calculation arriving at the same bad answer from a different direction. I need time, Rourke said. You have 48 hours, Vincent said. After that, Hargrove files. He stood. Hargrove stood beside him. The two attorneys looked at each other one more time, another exchange of information that didn't require words. Vincent looked at Rourke one final time across the table. Daniel, he said, 20 years. Rourke did not respond. Vincent walked out. In the elevator down, Hargrove said nothing until the doors opened on the ground floor. Then, that was either very effective or very catastrophic, and I won't know which for 48 hours. I know, Vincent said. If he calls his federal handler before he calls us. He won't, Vincent said. He called this meeting because he wanted to see whether I had enough to be dangerous. Now he knows I do. A man in his position calculates whether the immunity is worth more than his exposure if the fabrication becomes documented. The math doesn't favor him. And if his calculation is different than yours, then we file and we fight it, Vincent said. But I don't think it will be. He walked out into the rain. His phone showed 2 missed calls from Charlotte. He looked at them for a moment, the rain hitting his jacket, the harbor gray and churning through the gaps between buildings, and felt the 2 halves of his life pressing against each other with a force that had been building for months and was now insistent, immediate, undeniable. He called her back. She answered on the second ring. "Hey." Her voice had something in it he couldn't identify through the phone. "Hey, I saw your calls. Is everything I'm fine. The baby's fine." A pause. "I went to the pharmacy for the vitamins and I ran into someone. A woman named Patricia Holt. She works in the county clerk's office." He felt something shift in his chest. "Okay." She recognized my name from the withdrawal filing. She was very friendly. She mentioned she had processed the original filing in the morning and then the withdrawal later the same day. Charlotte's voice was very controlled. She said she had never seen that happen before. A same-day withdrawal. She said it very sweetly. She meant it as a nice thing. "Charlotte, I'm not calling because I'm upset about that. I'm calling because running into her made me realize that other people know, that the divorce was filed and then withdrawn, and people in this city know that, and it's going to be something that people talk about." A pause. "I don't know why that hit me harder than I expected." He stood in the rain outside the Harborview Club on Atlantic Avenue. "Because it made it real in a way that existing between the 2 of us hadn't yet," he said. "Yes," she said, "exactly that. Charlotte, whatever people know or talk about, none of that changes what I'm doing or why I'm doing it." "I know." A pause. "I know. She stopped. He heard her exhale. "I have the 20-week ultrasound Thursday. Dr. Vance's office, 11 o'clock. You said you'd be there." "I'll be there." "If anything comes up, I'll be there," he said. "Charlotte, look at me through the phone. I will be there." A brief silence. Something in it softened fractionally. "Okay," she said. "I'll be home by 6. He hung up. He stood in the rain for another moment, then he called Carver. "Rourke has 48 hours, he said. "I want surveillance on him throughout. I want to know the moment he makes contact with his federal handler, and I want Russo's documentation complete and in Hargrove's hands by end of day tomorrow." "Done," Carver said. "How did it go?" "It went," Vincent said. "We'll know in 48 hours. He got in the car. The rain had not stopped. The harbor was pewter and indifferent. The city moved around the car the way it always did, purposeful, crowded, entirely unaware of the particular pressure system that had formed inside one man's life and was now approaching its maximum sustainable tension. He got home at 5:58. Charlotte was in the kitchen. She looked up when he came in, and something in her posture shifted. Not relief exactly, but the specific relaxation of a person who had been held at a low level of alertness and was now releasing it. He hung his coat. He came into the kitchen. He stood across the island from her. "You're wet," she said. "It's still raining." She pushed a folded dish towel across the island without comment. He took it and dried his face and hands. They stood in the kitchen in the ordinary evening light, and it was the most normal thing that had happened to him in 72 hours. And the normalcy of it hit him somewhere internal and undefended. "Are you hungry?" she said. "Yes." "I made soup." She turned back to the stove. "Nothing complicated. I can't manage complicated with one hand." "Soup is good," he said. He sat at the island. She moved around the kitchen with the competent one-armed adaptation she had developed over the past several days. Knowing which tasks required 2 hands and routing around them without drama, the way a person who has spent years navigating difficult circumstances does when a new obstacle presents itself. He watched her. He thought about Merritt's question, what would happen if she knew the things you're protecting her from? He thought about Rourke sitting across a table with his hands flat and open in the gesture of a man performing honesty. He thought about Charlotte's handwriting in the margin of the divorce document, the small notation, the careful question she had asked her attorney. "Charlotte," he said. She turned. "There is a professional situation that is serious," he said. "I can't tell you the specifics, but I want you to know that it's happening and that it's the reason I've had..." That it's the reason some mornings have been different than I said they were. She looked at him, measuring. I promised you I wouldn't lie, he said. I'm not lying. I'm telling you there are things I can't tell you. That's different. I want you to know the difference exists. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned back to the stove. Is anyone going to get hurt? She said. I'm working very hard to make sure that doesn't happen. Are you going to get hurt? No, he said. She stirred the soup. He watched her back, the set of her shoulders, the way she processed things inward rather than outward. The patience of a woman who had learned to sit with uncertainty because her work required it every day. Okay, she said finally. Thank you for telling me. He sat with that for a moment. The specific texture of being thanked for a partial truth by a person who understood it was partial and accepted it anyway because it was more than she'd been given before. It felt worse than he expected and better than he deserved. Thursday arrived. He was up at 6. He reviewed the overnight reports from Carver. Rourke had made 2 phone calls, both to his attorney, neither to any number associated with federal contacts. He had not left his house in Brookline. The 48-hour clock was running. He was dressed by 7. He had calls to make, but he scheduled them for afternoon, after the appointment, because he had said he would be there, and there was no call that outweighed that. He told Charlotte at breakfast that he was clear until the afternoon. She looked at him over her coffee with the expression she had been using for the past week, the one that was not quite trust and not quite its absence, the one that lived in the provisional space between. Okay, she said. They drove to Dr. Vance's office together, which was itself a thing that had not happened in years. The 2 of them in the same car, going somewhere together, the simple fact of shared direction. Vincent drove. Charlotte sat with her splinted arm in her lap and watched the city. They did not talk much. The silence was not empty. Dr. Vance's office was on the 4th floor of a medical building in Longwood. The waiting room had other couples, some young, some not, all at various stages of the particular suspended animation of people who are waiting for information about something they cannot control. Vincent sat in a waiting room chair and did not check his phone. Charlotte noticed. He knew she noticed. When they called Charlotte's name, he followed her in. The ultrasound room was dim, the equipment positioned beside an examination table that Charlotte climbed onto with practiced efficiency. Doctor. Vance came in behind the technician, a small, precise woman who had the quality of someone who had delivered a lot of news in this room, in both directions, and had made peace with both. She exchanged a few words with Charlotte, clinical, warm. She looked at Vincent and gave him the brief professional assessment she gave all partners in that room, measuring his capacity for this experience, making a fast decision. Ready? She said. Charlotte looked at the screen. Yes, she said. The technician applied the transducer, and the monitor filled with gray static, and then, suddenly, immediately, without any gradual approach, the image resolved, and there he was. A boy. 20 weeks. Fully formed and entirely unaware of everything his existence had already set in motion. His heartbeat was visible on the monitor. Not heard yet, just seen, that small rhythmic flicker that is the body's first and most fundamental statement of itself. Vincent looked at the screen and felt something break open inside his chest that had nothing to do with empire or strategy or the 48-hour clock or Rourke or the grand jury or anything he had built or protected or feared losing for 20 years. It was simpler than any of that. It was the feeling of a man seeing his son for the first time. His throat closed. He did not make a sound. He sat in the chair beside the examination table with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped in front of him, and he looked at the screen with an expression he could not have described if asked. Charlotte was looking at the screen too. Then she looked at him. He became aware of her looking. He turned. Her eyes were wet. His were too, he realized, a fact that arrived with the mild surprise of a man who had not cried in so long he'd forgotten that his body was still capable of it. She reached out her free hand, her right hand, the good one. He took it. They sat like that, her hand in his, both of them looking at the monitor, at the small, fierce pulse of something they had made together during a night in January when everything else was already falling apart, and neither of them had known it yet. Dr. Vance said something about measurements. The technician said something about positioning. The clinical world continued around them, organized and purposeful. Neither of them heard it. Chasm. They were in the parking structure when his phone rang. He had it in his hand from habit, had picked it up when they left the office. And the screen showed Carver's name, and the time was 11:47, and the 48 hours were not up yet. Charlotte saw the phone. She saw his face change when he looked at it, the micro shift that happens when information arrives, and a trained mind begins processing it before the body has finished its previous task. "Go ahead," she said quietly. He looked at her. "It's okay," she said. "Take it." He answered. "What?" Rourke didn't wait for the 48 hours, Carver said. His voice was at a register that Vincent had heard perhaps twice in 9 years. He contacted his federal handler this morning. "We got the confirmation 20 minutes ago. The contact our man flagged. Rourke told them we approached him, that we attempted to pressure a cooperating witness." The parking structure was cold and smelled of exhaust, and the light was the flat fluorescent kind that makes everything look slightly wrong. "He turned the meeting against us," Vincent said. "Yes. He's framing it as witness tampering. If his handler moves on it, you could have agents at Commonwealth Avenue before the end of the day." Charlotte was standing 6 feet away, watching him with the expression of a woman who cannot hear the words, but can read the entire shape of what is happening from the way a man holds his body when the ground shifts under him. Vincent looked at her. The boy on the monitor. That small, fierce pulse. His hand around hers in the dark of an ultrasound room. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and in the 6 feet of cold, fluorescent air between them, everything that had been built and damaged and painstakingly, provisionally, begun again hung at the precise point of maximum tension. The moment before something either holds or doesn't. The moment that everything after will measure itself against. His voice, when he spoke into the phone, was completely level. "Get Hargrove on the phone now," he said. "Conference the 3 of us. We file everything we have on the fabrication before they can move. Today, within the hour." "Vincent, if we file preemptively and they're already moving, then we're on record first," he said, "which is the only position that matters. Do it now, Carver." He lowered the phone. Charlotte was still looking at him. He crossed the 6 feet between them and stood in front of her and looked at her directly, the way he had been learning, slowly, imperfectly, against the grain of every habit he had, to look at the people who needed him to actually be present. "I need to handle something," he said. "Right now. It cannot wait." "I know," she said. "I need you to know that I am handling it and not running from this." He gestured with his chin toward the building they had just left, toward the room on the 4th floor, toward the screen, toward the image. "I am not running from this." Charlotte looked at his face for a long moment. She had the eyes of a woman who had been wrong before and knew it, and was choosing, deliberately, against the evidence of her own past disappointment, to make a decision. "I know," she said again. Different this time. He nodded. He raised the phone back to his ear as Hargrove's voice came on the line, already mid-sentence, already moving, and Vincent walked 3 paces away from Charlotte and began the most important professional conversation of his life in a cold parking structure in Longwood, while his wife stood behind him with their son's image still fresh in her memory, and the whole fragile weight of what they were rebuilding balanced on the specific and unrepeatable quality of this particular moment, which would not come again, and which both of them understood, without saying it, was the last moment before everything either broke or held. Hargrove's voice on the phone was already moving at the speed of a man who understood that the next 60 minutes would determine the shape of everything after. "Listen to me carefully," Hargrove said. "If Rourke has already contacted his handler and framed the meeting as witness tampering, the federal timeline has accelerated. They may move today. They may not. But we cannot assume tomorrow." "So we file first," Vincent said. "We file first. Everything. The Russo documentation, the shell company trace, the Quincy warehouse, the forensic accountant's name, the timeline of the evidence fabrication going back to August. We present it as a counter-disclosure, evidence that the cooperating witness in an active federal proceeding manufactured the documentation he provided, and that we have proof of the manufacturing mechanism." A pause. "This is not a small thing, Vincent. This is us walking into the federal building and saying the cooperating witness committed fraud against the court. They will not receive that quietly." "I know." It will also not protect you immediately. Even with the filing, there's a window, hours, possibly a day, where you are exposed before the counter-disclosure is reviewed and the fabrication is established. How do we close the window? Speed, Hargrove said. And Russo. Vincent understood immediately. Russo testifies to the fabrication directly. Russo's account of how the evidence was constructed, dated, specific, with the manifest records he altered, is the most direct evidence that the chain was not organic. If he provides that in a sworn statement today before any federal action is initiated, it becomes part of the counter-disclosure. Russo will want protection in exchange. Yes, that's your negotiation, not mine, but it needs to happen in the next 2 hours. Vincent was already walking toward the parking structure exit, phone at his ear, the other hand in his jacket pocket. Behind him, Charlotte kept pace without being asked to. She had not gone to the car, had not removed herself from proximity. She was simply there, moving alongside him, in the particular way of a person who has decided that presence is the thing they can offer. 2 hours, Vincent said. Have the filing prepared. I'll have Russo's statement to you within 90 minutes. He ended the call. He turned to Charlotte. She was looking at him with the expression that had no clean name. Not fear, not calm, but the thing that lives between them when a person has fully understood the stakes and has decided not to look away. I need to go, he said. I need to go right now, and I need you to go home, and I need you to not worry. Don't tell me not to worry, she said. Her voice was even. Just go. Do what you need to do, and come home. He looked at her. Come home, she said again. Quieter. He nodded once. He did not say anything because there was nothing that the moment required except the nod, and he gave it, and then he was moving. Carver had Russo in a safe house in Somerville, a second-floor apartment above a dry-cleaning business on a street that smelled of solvent and exhaust. Vincent arrived at 12:22. Carver met him at the base of the stairs. He's cooperative but scared, Carver said. He knows the 48 hours didn't hold. Good. Fear makes people precise. Vincent started up the stairs. Russo was sitting at a kitchen table with a mug of coffee he had not touched. He was 53, slight, with the look of a man who had spent the night cycling through every version of the next 24 hours and had not found a good one in any iteration. He looked up when Vincent came through the door, and something in his face did what faces do when the thing they've been dreading finally arrives and is somehow more manageable than the anticipation. Vincent sat across from him. Carver stood near the door. You know why I'm here, Vincent said. Yes. Russo's voice was rough. He hadn't slept. I need everything, not a summary, not the version you already gave Carver. Every date, every manifest record you altered, every communication you had with Cates and Quincy, every instruction that came down from Rourke's side, in writing, sworn, in the next 90 minutes. Russo looked at the table. And in exchange, I make one phone call that keeps your name out of the federal filing as a primary subject. Vincent leaned forward slightly. You're not the architect here. You're a man who made a bad decision under pressure and compounded it over 8 months. That's a different conversation than Daniel Rourke, who engineered a fraudulent evidence chain designed to send innocent men to prison. The distinction matters. I can preserve that distinction for you, but only if you're completely accurate and completely fast. Russo looked at him. His eyes were tired in a way that went past physical. The tiredness of a man who has been carrying something wrong for 8 months and has not slept easily in all that time. Everything, Russo said. Everything. Russo put his hands flat on the table and started talking. 47 minutes later, Carver was reading the sworn statement on his phone while a notary they had called in sat at the corner of the table gathering her things. The statement was 11 pages. It was specific and sequential, and it left no interpretive space. It named Rourke by name, Cates by name, the forensic accountant, a man named Del Vecchio who worked out of an office in Providence, by name. It dated every alteration to the manifest records. It described the secondary drop point in Quincy with a precision that could be physically verified. Vincent read the last 3 pages standing up. Then he called Hargrove. You have it in 40 minutes, he said. File everything the moment it arrives. Don't wait for my confirmation. Understood, Hargrove said. Vincent, after we file Suki, there will be a response from the federal side. It may not be immediate, but it will not be gentle. I know that. You should be with your attorney when it comes. I will be. He paused. Alan, does this work? A silence of the particular kind that comes from an honest man considering an honest question. It gives you the best possible position, Hargrove said finally. Whether that's enough depends on things neither of us controls, but yes, I think it works. Vincent put the phone in his pocket. He looked at Russo across the table. Russo was looking at the window. Gray afternoon light, the wet street below, the ordinary world continuing outside at its normal pace, indifferent to the specific catastrophe being navigated 4 floors above it. Go somewhere for a few days, Vincent said to him. Not far. Stay reachable. Carver will have a number for you. Russo nodded. He did not say thank you. He seemed to understand that thank you was not the appropriate register for this exchange. Vincent left. The federal response came the following morning. Not agents at the door of the Commonwealth Avenue house. That was the version Vincent had spent the night preparing Charlotte for, quietly, without framing it as the emergency it potentially was. It came instead as a phone call to Hargrove at 7:41 a.m. from the office of the Assistant U.S. Attorney overseeing the grand jury proceeding. Hargrove called Vincent at 7:43. They want a meeting, Hargrove said. This afternoon, me and you with 2 of their people. They've reviewed the counter-disclosure. And they want to meet. A pause. That's actually significant. If they were moving forward with the tampering framing, they wouldn't ask for a meeting. They'd move. The meeting means the counter-disclosure created enough disruption that they need to reassess, which means the fabrication is visible to them now. Which means it is visible and they are in the uncomfortable position of having built a portion of their grand jury case on documentation that their own cooperating witness has now been credibly accused of manufacturing. Hargrove's voice was as close to satisfaction as it got. They have a problem. The meeting is them figuring out how big. Vincent was in the kitchen. Charlotte was upstairs. He had told her at 6 that morning that the situation was in Hargrove's hands, that he would know more today, that he needed her to let it sit until he had something concrete to report. She had listened. She had not asked questions he couldn't answer. She had put her free hand on his forearm for a moment, a brief, specific contact, and then gotten up to make coffee. 2 o'clock, Hargrove said. Federal Building on Courthouse Way. I'll be there. He was. The room was small and deliberately neutral, a conference room without windows, a table that had seen 1,000 difficult conversations and absorbed all of them. 2 assistant U.S. attorneys, a woman named Cahill, who was senior and did most of the talking, and a younger man named Reston, who took notes and said very little. Hargrove sat beside Vincent. They had been offered water. Only Hargrove had taken it. Cahill put the counter-disclosure on the table. She did not open it. She had read it. Her manner made that clear. Mr. Ashcroft, she said, I want to be straightforward with you. The documentation in your filing, if it holds up to verification, represents a significant problem for a proceeding that has been running since January. It will hold up, Hargrove said. Cahill looked at him. We'll be the ones determining that. She looked back at Vincent. What I can tell you is that the scope of what you've described, if accurate, indicates that a cooperating witness in an active federal proceeding not only provided falsified documentation, but did so with the specific intent of creating evidence of criminal enterprise where none existed in the form presented. That's what the documentation shows, Vincent said. It would make Rourke's cooperation agreement voidable, Reston said. The first words he'd spoken. He had the specific precision of a young attorney who has been told to say one thing and say it clearly. More than voidable, Hargrove said. It makes any evidence derived from or supported by Rourke's cooperation tainted. And depending on what your office knew or should have known about the chain of custody for the Bellamy documentation. He left that sentence deliberately unfinished. Cahill looked at him steadily. She was a careful woman, and she did not react to the implication. Our office acted on information provided in good faith by a designated cooperating witness, she said. If that information was fraudulent, that reflects on the witness, not on this office. Agreed, Hargrove said. which is why we brought it to your attention promptly rather than waiting for a grand jury to act on compromised evidence. A silence. Cahill looked at Vincent. She had the eyes of a person who has spent 20 years looking at men like him and has developed a precise instrument for what they are. "The meeting between you and Rourke at the Harborview Club," she said. "My client attended a meeting requested by Rourke," Hargrove said, "with legal counsel present. The meeting concerned Rourke's unauthorized redirection of product from my client's legitimate logistics operation. No threat was issued, no pressure was applied, and the content of the meeting was entirely consistent with a business dispute between two parties. Rourke's account differs. Rourke is a man who has manufactured federal evidence to protect himself," Hargrove said. "His account of a meeting that occurred after we'd identified that fabrication should be weighed accordingly." Cahill looked at the counter-disclosure on the table. She put 2 fingers on it, not opening it, just contact. "We're going to need time to verify," she said. "We expected that," Hargrove said. "During that verification period, I'd ask that your client remain available and make no operational decisions that could be characterized as responsive to this proceeding." "Understood," Hargrove said. He looked at Vincent. "Understood," Vincent said. Cahill stood. The meeting was over. She picked up the counter-disclosure. Reston closed his notebook. At the door, Cahill paused and turned. "Mr. Ashcroft." She held his gaze. "If what's in this filing is accurate, your organization still operates in ways this office has ongoing interest in. This resolves one matter. It doesn't close the larger conversation." "I understand that," Vincent said. She nodded once and left. In the elevator, Hargrove said, "That was as good as it could have gone. She told me they're not finished with me." "She told you what she was required to tell you. She also sat in a room and acknowledged that her cooperating witness fabricated evidence, which means her grand jury proceeding has a serious structural problem that she now has to manage internally." He pushed his glasses up. "The witness tampering framing is dead. They can't pursue it when Rourke's credibility has been destroyed by his own documented conduct. And the grand jury case, whatever shape it was taking, has to be rebuilt from the parts that don't touch Rourke's testimony. Which takes time. Which takes a great deal of time. And during that time, you have the opportunity to make changes that make the larger conversation Cahill mentioned a less compelling use of federal resources." He looked at Vincent sideways. "I have been your attorney for 11 years. I know what I'm not supposed to say." "Say it." "The organization, as it currently operates, will eventually produce another Rourke, another Russo, another structural failure that someone will find and use." He paused. "I'm not telling you what to do with that. I'm telling you it's true." Vincent looked at the elevator doors. "I know," he said. He drove home. Not immediately. He sat in the parking structure for 20 minutes first, engine off, phone in his hand. He was not doing anything with the phone. He was simply sitting in the quiet of the car in the dim parking structure, letting the last 48 hours settle into whatever shape they were going to take. The counter-disclosure had been filed. The meeting had gone as well as it could. Rourke's cooperation agreement was effectively destroyed. The grand jury proceeding had been disrupted in a way that would take months to reconstruct, if it was reconstructed at all. The immediate crisis, the one that had begun with Carver's message on a night when Vincent was choosing between his phone and his wife, had been navigated without anyone going to prison and without the kind of irreversible action that would have foreclosed all other options. That was what he had. Not a victory, an extension, a window. He thought about what Hargrove had said. Another Rourke, another Russo. He had known this in the abstract for years. The way you know things you have decided not to examine because the examination requires a decision you are not yet ready to make. He thought about a boy on a monitor, that small, fierce pulse. He thought about what kind of man he wanted that boy to know. He turned the engine on. He drove home. Charlotte was in the living room when he came in. She was not pretending to read or pretending to watch anything. She was simply sitting in the armchair near the window with her splinted arm in her lap and her eyes on the door, which told him she had been waiting with the specific alert stillness of a woman who had been in enough uncertain situations to know that stillness was the most efficient form of waiting. He came in and sat on the couch across from her. "It's handled," he said. She looked at him, measuring the sentence, the tone, the way he was sitting. Handled meaning finished, she said. Handled meaning the immediate crisis is resolved. There are longer-term things that remain. He paused. I'm not going to be arrested, Charlotte. She let out a breath. Not dramatically. Just a controlled release, the kind that happens when a person has been holding something carefully for a long time and is told they can set it down. Okay, she said. The person who created the problem is no longer in a position to do further damage. The people who needed to know the truth about what happened now know it. He looked at his hands. The larger situation, the organization, what I've built and how it runs, that's something I need to make decisions about, longer-term decisions. I don't have answers for you today, but I want you to know the conversation is happening inside me. She looked at him for a long time. What kind of decisions? About what I want to be responsible for when Ethan is old enough to understand what responsibility means. The name landed between them. They had chosen it the night after the ultrasound, quietly, in bed, and it had not been discussed since, but it had settled into the air of the house with the permanence of things that are simply true. Charlotte's expression shifted. Something behind her eyes moved, not softening exactly, but opening. Okay, she said quietly. Those are decisions worth making. They sat in the living room in the afternoon light. It was not resolved. Not the marriage, not the organization, not the long, careful work of becoming something better than what he had been. None of that was resolved and would not be resolved quickly or cleanly or without cost. But the room was quiet, and they were in it together, and that was different from what it had been. The weeks that followed were not dramatic. That was the most honest thing that could be said about them. They were not dramatic. There was no single moment of transformation, no conversation that repaired everything, no gesture large enough to stand in for the accumulated weight of 8 years. There was instead the ordinary material of incremental change, the things that are invisible in the moment and only become visible in accumulation. Vincent kept every medical appointment, not as an act of performance, Charlotte would have identified performance, but because he had decided that the appointments were not optional, and so they were not optional, and the decision required no further reinforcement. He went to Dr. Merritt every Tuesday at 8. He did not find it comfortable. He found it useful in the way that uncomfortable things are useful when you're trying to dismantle machinery that has been running on its own momentum for decades. Merritt did not tell him what to do. He asked questions that made Vincent examine the architecture of his own assumptions, and the examining was slow and sometimes produced nothing, and sometimes produced something that sat with him for days. In April, he began delegating, not the way he had delegated before, assigning tasks and maintaining invisible control through the threat of his own response, but genuinely delegating, trusting the lieutenants he trusted and accepting that the outcome would be imperfect and that imperfect outcomes were survivable. It felt like letting go of something physical, a weight he had been holding for so long that the absence of it was initially more disorienting than the holding had been. Carver noticed. He said nothing, because he was Carver, but he noticed, and he executed the expanded responsibilities with the precision of a man who had been waiting a long time to be trusted with them. In May, Vincent had a conversation with Hargrove that had been coming since the parking structure after the federal meeting. He began extracting himself from the portions of the organization that were not defensible, not loudly, not in a way that created instability or invited attention, but with the methodical deliberateness of a man who has decided on a destination and is clearing the path toward it. Hargrove had said it would take time. It took time. Charlotte watched all of this from proximity. She did not comment on most of it. She had spent 8 years watching him not change, and she understood that announced change is cheaper than demonstrated change. So she watched the demonstrated version and withheld judgment and let the evidence accumulate. She went back to work in her 6th month. Half shifts initially, then full shifts as her arm healed and her energy stabilized. Her patients were the same, frightened, exhausted, arriving at the most vulnerable moment of their lives and needing someone to hold the space of certainty while they went through the uncertain part. She was good at it, in the same way she had always been good at it. Her colleagues noticed she seemed different, though they couldn't specify exactly how. A little less contained, a little more present. She had a therapist too now, A woman named Dr. Solis, who worked out of an office in Cambridge and had the specific quality of hearing things without judgment while also not letting anything slide past unexamined. Charlotte had started going in April, quietly, without telling Vincent until the third session, at which point she mentioned it at dinner. He had said, "Good," and meant it, and she had heard that he meant it, and that was that. They did not perform their reconciliation. They did not discuss it publicly or mark it with any formal gesture. Renata, who came for a weekend in May, watched them at dinner one evening, Vincent clearing plates while Charlotte told a story about a patient, Vincent pausing mid-reach to actually listen to the punchline, actually laughing at it, and said nothing because she was Renata and she had promised not to have opinions, but when she and Charlotte were alone later, she had simply said, "Okay," in a tone that contained a full paragraph of revised assessment. Charlotte had said, "I know." In the third week of June, Rourke pleaded guilty to evidence fabrication and obstruction of justice in a federal proceeding. His cooperation agreement was voided. His immunity was gone. The sentence, when it came months later, was not light. Vincent read about it in the morning and did not discuss it with Charlotte because it was not hers to carry, and he was learning the difference between honesty and transfer, that telling her everything was not always the same as being close to her, and that some things belonged to him to process and resolve without involving the people he loved in their weight. He told Merritt about it on Tuesday. Merritt had asked what it felt like. Vincent had sat with the question for a while. "Like the end of something I built wrong," he said finally. Not triumphant, just concluded. "And what comes after something that's concluded?" Merritt asked. "Something else," Vincent said. "Whatever I build next." Ethan Vincent Ashcroft was born on a Wednesday in late August. The labor was 16 hours. Charlotte had been told second pregnancies were typically faster, but she had also spent 11 years in labor and delivery watching that generalization fail, so she had not placed significant stock in it. She labored through most of it without asking Vincent to do anything except be there, which he was. He was there for all of it, not as a man managing a situation. There was nothing to manage, nothing he could control, and he had learned enough by now to recognize when control was not available and to stop reaching for it. He sat beside her. He held her hand when she wanted it and stepped back when she didn't. When she told him, during a contraction at hour 11, that she was exhausted and angry at the entire concept of biology, he said, "I know," and meant it, and did not try to fix anything. The doctor who delivered Ethan was not Dr. Vance. She was on vacation, but a colleague who had the same quality of competent calm. The room was loud, and then suddenly, briefly, not loud, and then there was a different kind of sound entirely. The first cry. Charlotte laughed, the involuntary, helpless laugh of a person whose body has just done the most extraordinary thing it has ever done, and has no appropriate response other than that. Tears and laughter simultaneously, the particular combination that doesn't happen many times in a life. Vincent pressed his forehead against her hair. He did not say anything. There was nothing that needed saying. The nurse placed Ethan on Charlotte's chest, small, furious at having arrived, red-faced and objecting to everything about his new circumstances. Vincent looked at him. He was not what he had imagined. He was less abstract and more specific, more like an actual person, newly arrived, with opinions already forming about the temperature and the light, and whatever it was he had left behind to get here. He had Charlotte's coloring and what appeared to be a mouth shaped exactly like an argument. Vincent put one hand on the back of his son's head. The hand covered most of it. He could feel the heat of him, the impossible aliveness of him. "Hey," Vincent said. Quiet. Just that. Ethan kept objecting, but his objection shifted slightly. The way sounds shift when the source registers that something in the environment has changed. Charlotte looked at Vincent over their son's head. Her eyes were wet. Her hair was damp with effort. She was more visibly exhausted than he had ever seen her. She was also looking at him with an expression he had not seen before, so something entirely new, generated by this moment and nothing else. The expression of a woman who has been through something enormous with someone and has come out the other side and is now in the territory that exists after the enormous thing. "You're here," she said. "I'm here," he said. "All of it," she said. She meant the 16 hours. She meant the 8 months. She meant the 8 years before that and the specific morning in March that had started all of this. All of it, he said. The months after Ethan's arrival were their own education. A child does not allow the performance of change. He requires the actual thing. He is indifferent to intention and cares only for presence, only for the repeated fact of someone arriving when needed. Vincent had managed empires. He had not managed a 3 a.m. feeding, which is a different kind of management entirely, one that does not respond to authority, does not understand strategy, and cannot be delegated. He learned. He learned that he could function on 4 hours of sleep, which he had known. He learned that there is a specific quality of satisfaction in getting a small person to stop crying that is not available in any professional context, which he had not known. He learned that Charlotte, watching him pace the kitchen at 3 in the morning with Ethan against his chest, had an expression on her face that he had not put there in years. A specific warmth, tired but real. The expression of a woman watching something happen that she had stopped believing would happen and is surprised to find herself relieved about. He did not remark on it. He just kept pacing. Ethan's first weeks settled into his first months, and the world kept moving around the three of them with its ordinary indifference, which is what the world does, and which is fine, because the world's indifference is what creates the space for private things to be private. In October, Vincent had a conversation with 3 of his most trusted lieutenants. He told them he was restructuring. He told them what that meant, and what it didn't mean, and what the timeline was, and what he expected from each of them. The conversation was long and had moments of difficulty. Men who have built their lives around a particular structure do not receive news of its restructuring with simple equanimity, but it happened, and the decisions he made in that room were ones he had been working towards since the day he sat in a parking structure after a federal meeting and decided what kind of man he wanted his son to know. He told Merritt about it the following Tuesday. "How do you feel?" Merritt asked. "Like I'm taking down something I built wrong," Vincent said. "Again." "Same as when Rourke's case concluded?" "Different," Vincent said. "That one felt like an ending. This one feels like a beginning of something. The ending of the wrong thing is still just an ending. This is—" He paused. "This is me making a decision about what I want to be responsible for. That's different from something concluding." Merritt nodded slowly. He had the habit of nodding when he was not going to say anything, which was a way of acknowledging without filling space. Vincent had come to appreciate it. "What does it cost you?" Merritt asked. "Being honest about that, saying it aloud." "Less than it used to," Vincent said. Merritt let that sit. "That's the work," he said finally. "Right there. But Ethan's first birthday was a small gathering. Charlotte's idea. Nothing large, nothing performed. Renata and her husband. 2 of Charlotte's colleagues from the hospital who had become genuinely close over the years. Carver, who had come at Vincent's invitation and arrived with a gift that was entirely inappropriate for a 1-year-old, and entirely appropriate for the kind of man who has no experience with children and had tried his best. They ate in the garden of the Commonwealth Avenue house, the first time the garden had been used for anything social in years. Charlotte had put lights in the trees. Someone had brought a cake that Ethan destroyed with comprehensive enthusiasm, getting it in his hair and both ears and laughing at himself for doing it. Vincent sat beside Charlotte and watched his son and felt the specific weight of the day settle into him. Not heavy, but present. The kind of presence that makes you aware you are in something real. Later, after the guests had gone and Ethan was asleep upstairs and the garden was quiet with evening coming in over the rooftops, they sat at the table together. The remains of the birthday cake. 2 glasses of wine, mostly finished. The lights in the trees making small halos in the dusk. Charlotte said, "Do you still think about that morning?" He knew which morning she meant. There was only one morning in their shared vocabulary that was referred to simply as that morning. "Yes," he said. "Every day." She turned her glass on the table. A slow rotation. "What do you think about?" He considered the honest answer. The complete one, not the comfortable version. "I think about how close I came," he said. "Not just to losing you, to never knowing what I was losing. That's the part that—" He stopped. Pressed his thumb against the base of his wine glass. "I almost walked away from my whole life and called it a decision." Charlotte was quiet. I don't think that anymore, he said. Walking away from something is not the same as making a decision. A decision requires you to actually be present for it. I hadn't been present in years. She looked at him. When did you become present? Hospital hallway, he said. Plastic chair. 41 minutes. He met her eyes. Actually present, not managing, not calculating, just, he searched for the word, just there, with nothing working in my favor and nothing to control. For 41 minutes, I was just a person in a hallway waiting to find out if someone I loved was okay. Charlotte looked at him for a long time with that expression he still didn't have a full name for, the one that lived in the space between what she had given up expecting and what had actually happened. We were lucky, she said. He thought about that. He had thought about it many times over the past year, the word luck and what it covered and what it didn't. The accident was luck, he said. The hospital, the timing, that was luck. Everything after, he shook his head slowly. Everything after was a choice, yours and mine. Not always the right choice, sometimes the wrong one, but a choice every time. He paused. I don't want to give luck credit for that. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over his. Her hand was warm. Her eyes were tired in the way that comes from a year of broken sleep and an honest rebuilding, not from unhappiness. You're right, she said. They sat in the garden in the last light. The lights in the trees came on more distinctly as the sky darkened. Inside, from the baby monitor on the table, Ethan's breathing was a steady, untroubled sound. It was not a perfect evening. The garden needed work. The lights in one corner of the string had gone out sometime during the party, and no one had fixed them. Charlotte's arm had healed but still ached in cold weather, and probably always would. The organization Vincent had spent 20 years building was in the slow, careful process of becoming something different, which meant it was in the uncomfortable in-between space of no longer being what it was and not yet fully being what it was going to be. These were not small imperfections, but imperfection was not the same as failure. He had learned that in Merritt's office. He had learned it in hospital hallways and federal meeting rooms and late-night kitchens and dark bedrooms where someone was sleeping, and he was sitting in a chair choosing to be there instead of somewhere that felt more like control. He had learned it most clearly in the face of a boy who had his mother's coloring and what appeared to be permanent opinions about everything, and who did not know and would not know for many years all the specific things that had to happen. The decisions and the failures and the near misses and the long, grinding, incremental work to bring him into a house where both his parents were present and honest and trying in the imperfect, daily, undramatic way that is the only way that counts. Ethan would know his father, not the version his father had been, the one who turned love into ambient noise and called it protection, not the version who confused silence with consensus and called it peace, the version that had come after, the one that cost something to build, that required him to dismantle things he had spent decades constructing and start over in rooms where no one could help him but himself. That version. Across the table, Charlotte turned her wine glass once more and then set it down and looked at the lights in the trees with an expression that was simply at rest. Not ecstatic, not performing contentment, just genuinely, quietly at rest. The expression of a person who has been through the thing and has come out on the other side and has decided that the other side is worth the crossing. Vincent watched her. He thought about the first time he had seen her, the gala, the argument about temperature, the involuntary laugh. He thought about the years between then and now, the shape of them, the texture of the slow damage and the slower repair. He thought about what she had said in the hospital the night of the accident. You can't undo things just because something scared you. She was right. You couldn't. But you could do something different from what you'd done before. You could make a different choice, again, every day, for as long as you were given the chance to make it. That was not redemption. He did not think in terms of redemption. It was too clean a word for something this complicated. It was something simpler and less dramatic and more durable than redemption. It was choosing, again, every day. He turned his hand over under hers and held it. The lights in the trees made their small halos in the dark. From the monitor, Ethan breathed his steady, untroubled breath. And the night came in over the city, ordinary and indifferent, and full of the ordinary lives of ordinary people making their small daily choices toward or away from the things that mattered most to them. And inside one garden on one quiet street, two people sat at a table in the aftermath of everything that had happened, which was not small, and held on.